this week's Workers' World Labour Show, coming to you from our virtual studio in Khayelitsha, Cape Town. I'm your host, Helga Jansen-Daubia. The COVID-19 pandemic has severely affected the world's people and their livelihoods. July 2020 statistics from the World Health Organization indicate a global infection rate of more than 16 million, with more than 646,000 deaths. The lives and livelihoods of millions around the world have been negatively affected by the virus. Governments have responded with lockdowns to curb and control the spread of infection. As economies are slowly opening, governments are battling to create patterns of a new normal to ensure that infection spikes can be controlled and responded to timelessly. Public transport is an important cog in the economic wheel. It is deemed an essential service for people and goods to move around efficiently and to ensure that essential workers are transported to where they are needed. For many in overcrowding urban centers, public transport is often the only means of moving around. In today's show, we talk passenger public transport and the COVID-19 pandemic. In today's show, we discuss passengers transport in the era of COVID-19. But before we go to our studio discussion, let's watch an insert produced by the Workers' World Media Productions editorial team.
On public transport, with the increase in the number of people returning to work, long-distance public transport crossing provincial, metropolitan or district boundaries is permitted to operate. Public transport will now be allowed to operate throughout the day. However, capacity restrictions remain.
The challenges are like kama taxing again no konon pila outwanele pele repeat la hana re nna bya le bya but then still ira already driver ba nyako ketsa chelete ya transport ka lebaka la hore a ra tlala.
We're not making any income or managing the business like before the pandemic could fall on us.
Hulle staar nou die trendsman in die gesig.
The companies are only relying on the subsidy, which is not enough. As we speak now, we've seen most of the companies requesting consultation to reduce the staff in a form of a retrenchment. Others, they want to cut hours of work. Others, they are proposing that workers must work on the rotational basis.
Die companies wil nou vir hulle retrench omdat hulle voel hulle maak nie meer geld nie.
Mfuthi ngangisenza kwecompany bathi PCX ngapha khona licensing. Kwafika ikhathi ama COVID-19 lezo ke saphela ama contract kwafika ama contracts ephela yabo kwathiwa hayi umsebenzi awukho madodeni yabona na iCovid-19 ihlasele nayo waphela umsebenzi mfuthi kanjalo.
Ayinkinga yizo nje leze ezakulayisha kancane ugijima kaningi imali ingahlangana bona nje ipetrol yami ku yabona imali yomuntu ngayihlangana kaningi ulayisha abantu abawu10 yiko nje okusibambile.
The small money they are getting as per what they get per day is all they use to buy sanitizers to sanitize the clients who are the passengers.
All minibus taxis must be sanitized after every trip. All taxi ranks must be sanitized at regular intervals. Where appropriate, government will provide assistance.
We are on our own. It's only like I said before, government came into place, came into the game with us that they should dish out the sanitizers and the disinfectants. But other than that, anything else we are on our own. The way we running the industry.
Des équipements de protection individuelle gratuits, avec la formation nécessaire à leur utilisation et à leur élimination en toute sécurité. Ces équipements comprennent des gants, masques, désinfectants pour la main, et lavage de mains à l'eau ou au savon et doivent protéger correctement contre les aérosols et empêcher le contact avec la main.
We have not seen the sanitizers. We have not seen the mask, the free mask. We have to dig into our pocket to buy the sanitizers, the mask.
The safety precautions are not up to standard.
Inadequate health and safety standards have increased the risk that we face while doing our critical jobs through this crisis.
The fact that they know that they can get sick, that is a fear that everyone is facing.
We don't know who has it, who doesn't have it. To wait for a person to show the symptoms, I think sometimes it's very dangerous because now I might get it now, but I won't know.
Working conditions that minimize transmission and facilitate social distancing, such as the non-collection of fares, limiting passenger numbers, and removing revenue targets. We also need access to regular and free COVID-19 testing, strict and regular cleaning procedures, and safe commuting measures.
So it's not only the pandemic that they're fighting, they're also fighting the fact that the companies now wants to retrench them.
No, the problem is one, you can't go home because the permit that you have is the permit for work. If you go to another province, you can't do nothing. That's the problem you have.
We were not allowed to operate and it came as a surprise. So, as a surprise, and also as a truck driver, we haven't put everything in to save money for.
When you're coming to meet the people, they are scared of you, they are telling you they are traveling solo places. Yeah, that's a problem we're getting as the travelers.
I mustn't take the people on the road. You must always be alone on a truck for your safety, for my safety.
My thinking and the way I see things is going to be a bit steep and hard, and it's uphill for the economy to accumulate some of the businesses they've lost and revenues, and even the industry itself. But what matters most is if lives can be saved, and that and businesses will come around. Like it cannot be a one-day thing, but it will slowly and pick up.
Welcome back. We're talking transport and the COVID-19 pandemic. Joining us in our virtual studio, we would love to welcome our panel. Many of them have been on our Labour show, and so it's a special welcome. To Wulsan Lim, Director of International Affairs, Korean Public Service and Transport Workers Union. And we welcome her from Seoul, Korea at 9 o'clock in the evening. Welcome, Wulsan.
Thanks very much. It's good to be with you.
We're also joined by Pakamile Shlube, National Spokesperson for the National Union of Metal Workers for South Africa, NUMSA. Welcome, Pakamile.
Thank you for having me.
We're also joined by Tabisho Molalekwa, National Spokesperson for South African National Taxi Council, Santaku. Welcome.
Welcome, and thank you for receiving us.
And all the way in Cape Town, Zuki Swavuka, organizer for Unite Behind. Welcome, Zuki.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks to all of you. It's indeed, as we enter Women's Month, we were saying before we started recording that it's really a sign of the times where we have an all-woman panel except for our comrade Tabiso. And the show is also produced by a woman and presented by a woman. So as we enter Women's Month, this is indeed a sign of the times. But let's get into our discussion. I'd like to start with our comrade from South Korea, Ulsan, give us a sense of what the conditions of a post-COVID, not a vaccine environment, but a post-COVID environment is in South Korea currently.
I think that the whole world is suffering from a triple pandemic or a triple crisis that is, the health crisis and then an economic crisis and a social crisis, and it's taking different forms in different countries. The reality for Korea is that we have only a fraction of the cases, confirmed COVID cases that you do in South Africa. We have about 14,000 cases as of today. And because the strategy of response from the South Korean government was really based on early and widespread testing, and then also rapid and very specific contact tracing. I think we didn't have the same level of a lockdown as you've had in South Africa and as there has been in many other countries. And so in some ways, it's not touching daily life in the same way as it may be for you. And especially, I think, for public transport, we'll see a difference. On the other hand, the world is in economic crisis. We are facing an economic crisis. We're facing a lot of workers on unpaid leave, layoffs, particularly, for example, in the aviation sector, and well as in tourism and service. And we're starting to, we're seeing a general economic downturn. So for that reason, I think there are some things that are very similar, and we're looking at, obviously, not a quick recovery, but a long-term L-shaped recession, which is a global situation.
Indeed, I'd like to bring Pakamile into this part of the conversation, as Wolsan correctly sketches the picture for us that the economic impact on different sectors in the economy is indeed going to have repercussions. What about the workers that you represent,
Thank you so much for having us. As NUMSA, we have been hugely impacted by the coronavirus. And like Wolsan said, I think the picture painted by Wolsan, where she talks about the global impact, is particularly on aviation and tourism and the value chain. That is what we're experiencing as NUMSA. We're a trade union that represents workers in aviation, in bus passenger sector, as well as in rail through PRASA. And we are seeing that across all sectors, there's been a huge and very negative impact on workers and their families. The impact comes in part because of the travel ban. So when you look at aviation, I mean, you look across, it's not just SAA, which, as you know, is currently under business rescue. The entire aviation industry in South Africa is in crisis. ComAir is in business rescue. Bid Air, which is a service provider to ComAir, is facing a crisis. It's actually retrenching close to 80% of its staff. Air Chefs, South African Airways Technical. I mean, it's when we call it a job loss bloodbath. That's exactly what it is. Because the lockdown has had that kind of major impact on the aviation sector. You are seeing a little bit of recovery in the rail sector, where we're also organized, because trains have started operating again, buses have started operating again. So at least there's movement there. But in aviation, it's really, really bad.
Thank you for sketching that part of the transport sector for us, Pakamile, because I think that aviation, when we only think of the plane. We don't think of all the workers that need to make sure that plane sets off timelessly, that the technical aspects of the plane are dealt with, the food on the plane are dealt with, the security on the airport is dealt with. So the knock-on effect, definitely. You spoke about the travel ban, Tabiso. Let's bring you in here. We know that the taxi industry was also affected by the initial lockdown regulations in March, with a blanket stalling of travel interprovincially and even within the city. We also see that taxi operators as some are indicating, are not making any money. How has the travel ban impacted your members?
Look at the impact of COVID on the taxi industry alone is in threefold. Is on the operator, who's the actual entrepreneur, is on the employees rather, who are the drivers, the queue marshals, as well as those clerks there who work in the association offices. We have about 950 associations countrywide. So these are the staff who are impacted. So you, at average, you expect every association to have about 3 employees in the office. Now, and then you've got the last leg of impact, which is those hawkers who make income because of the existence of a taxi rank. And now we're talking that in excess of about 200,000 workers countrywide. Now, this is how this has impacted. When the first 21 days of lockdown were announced by the state president, you would remember that it was only 15% of the total operating fleet of the taxi industry which was operating. So which means you had about 200,000 taxis which are at a standstill, not working in any way. So you can imagine the impact on the employees and on those hawkers. So there was literally no form of income for at least a good month. And then you had even those taxis that were operating, which were operating at 50% capacity, but also under restricted, as Pakamile indicated, the issue of travel ban, which had also to do with operating hours. So that alone, it meant that a taxi which was used to making at least 3 trips a day ended up making 1 trip a day. So we were literally subsidizing the commuter, because remember at the time the industry was providing a service to your essential workers. So that was that. Even with the 70% that was increased after we had approached the minister, that was not necessarily to say you are making the industry break even. You were simply saying you want them to survive. So when you listen to what Bulsan said, when you listen to what Pakamile said, it is anybody's guess the degree of impact beyond COVID on the sectors in their different forms.
Tabisul, thank you for that. Let's bring Zuki into here. Zuki, you represent, your organization speaks with commuters, with working class communities who are the consumers, if you like, of public transport services. How has this impacted on their ability to make a living?
Look, it's Pakamile has already spoken about the effect, how people have been affected, and also Tabiso has done the same. So we talk about N2 ordinary. They've been affected by what has been happening economically and both their livelihoods. A lot of workers were saying that now their hours have been decreased. Instead of one person working for a shift, they now have to split the shift because there's retrenchment at work, and there's people that are affected by COVID. They're asked to stay at home. Those types of things. So people have been affected in a more in the history. In my 30 years of living, I've never experienced such. I spoke to a colleague of mine the other day, and I was saying to them that I've never even read a book that speak of such terror and of such crisis in my 30 years of living. So it's really like bad. It has made like a bad impact.
Indeed, Zuki, it is really abnormal times, if you like. We're going to come back after these brief messages. Don't go away when we continue our conversation about transport and the COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome back. We're talking COVID-19 and transport. and access to transport within this environment. Wilson, your trade union and you in particular authored an academic paper called COVID-19 and the Chance for Sustainable Transport. And that paper proposed a different way of thinking about policy for public transport. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, okay, I'll try to see if I can do this quickly. I think so I've been working, our union, Korean Public Service and Transport Workers Union, is an affiliate to the International Transport Workers Federation. So we've been working together to try to have a discussion about what is happening specifically to public transport because of COVID, both the very negative things that you had that we've been talking about, but then also some of the opportunities to re-envision transport in this moment. And I think basically what we're saying is, and this is for taxi, this is for buses and rail and metro and the like, that generally there's been a vast reduction, right, of ridership. And that's both because of actual lockdowns and stopping public transport, but also because people are afraid to use public transport. What that's done has opened up a discussion among transport operators, workers, and the government about because now these transport systems have to be reopened, and there are already changes happening to them. How are they gonna reopen? What are they gonna look like in the future? How are they gonna adapt to this COVID era, right? It's not the post-COVID era, it's the living with COVID era. And some of the things that come up are exactly what Comrade Zuki was talking about, is that it's the commuters who are dependent on public transport. They're usually less wealthy people, women. In countries that have, mixed races, it's mixed, people of color generally are more dependent on transport, and those workers are also generally essential workers. So even though there's a drop in ridership, essential workers who are generally undervalued in their societies, whose value is now being exposed by COVID because they are doing essential jobs, they're the ones that are dependent on public transport. And so as we envision these systems and how we want them to reopen, we have to do it focused on making sure that transport systems are responsive to the needs of those riders. They also obviously have to be safe for workers and for the public, which means, of course, both better disinfection and containment policies, provision of PPE to workers, and then also, they have to be reopened in a way that allows for people to use public transport as opposed to be dependent on cars, and so to be environmentally sustainable. And what we're doing is actually the ITF, the International Transport Workers Federation, has developed over the last couple of years a policy called the People's Public Transport Policy, and we're using principles from that policy to speak about a model for public transport that integrates all of the different modes, provides good jobs for workers, is safe for the public and safe for workers, and then environmentally sustainable, and integrated in a way that makes it work for the era under COVID-19. So that's, and I think that one of the avenues that's opening up right now is because governments and in some cases employers are also thinking about these things. There's some cases where there is dialogue between governments and unions about how this is going to go forward. In some places also where, because public funding is such an issue in both both workers and unions, and then also employers want government funding, that there's some cases where employers and workers representatives are coming together to campaign together for public funding.
Thank you, Wilson. I want to bring Mphakamile into this part of the conversation because, you talk about the COVID era. I remember three months ago, we spoke about the future, the coming environment, and we are living this environment now. This is the era. Mphakamile, is this a window for greater social compact between the state and the transport sector to reimagine, as Wilson was describing, reimagine a transport service, a common good for a transport service that can provide a dignified service and still make sure that people can earn a living.
Well, I think absolutely, because what COVID-19 has shown us is that the lie that capitalism has sold us, which is that all our best resources should be channeled in the direction of the wealthy elite at the expense of the masses. Suddenly the dustbin worker or the garbage collector is much more essential than the CEO. And the thing that the working class world over, particularly in countries where capitalism is dominant, the cry for a safe, affordable public transportation system has now been emphasized during this time. As NUMSA, we were deeply empathetic and sympathetic to the taxi associations during this time. We even issued a statement condemning the South African government because it was a lot of people were very quick to blame the taxi industry when the taxi industry said we are going to have to operate at 100% because of the fact that the sector is suffering and struggling very seriously economically as a result of COVID-19. And whilst we were fully aware as NUMSA of the health risks, we thought it was wrong that the taxi industry should be blamed for this. They're suffering because of a decision taken by government to promote other sectors at the expense of the one sector which carries the bulk of the working class, which is the taxi sector. And ultimately what COVID has done is to highlight the fact that decisions which have been taken up until now in many capitalist countries have been to the benefit of wealthy people, have been to the benefit of the elite. There needs to be much more investment in safe public transportation for the masses. And had that been the goal from day one, then COVID would not be a crisis for us today.
Let's bring Tabiso. Yeah, sorry for Camilo, but let's bring Tabiso into this part of the conversation. Tabiso, the media perception has definitely been that taxi drivers were calling for 100% capacity at the expense of people's health and people's lives. The picture that Pakamila now, of course, sketches is that the taxi industry is in fact an essential part of the transport services, particularly when we saw in the 90s a restructuring of the rail services, that we had less rail services. Tabiso?
Look, I would not rehash what Pakamile has said, because in the main, she speaks to the very important issues that were at the center of our standoff with government, and their support was usually noted by Santaco. I want to, however, indicate that beyond the current situation, we stand with the view as Santaco that we are not even sure that sanitization and putting of masks, considering the uniqueness of the taxi industry, is enough to deal with the pandemic within our sector. This is why part of what the leadership has decided was to put up a team of 5 to go around and look at other measures that can be put in place to find which way is best. Because, for instance, the issue of window stoppers as a part of dealing with the pandemic inside a taxi can achieve the opposite results, given the fact that we are in a flu season and so on. So we are at that level. In fact, we hold the view as Santaco that we need to plan for the safety of commuters around 2 years to come. Because even if we the COVID, the fact of the matter is that beyond it, there must be safety measures in place to mitigate potential rise.
Tabiso, and we're going to talk about this when we bring Zuki in after the break. It might well be the way you describe it, if we're looking at the next 2 years, that if government is insisting on 70%, we will then need to have more taxis on the road to make sure that more people then can get to work and more operators can be on the road. I'm sure that Wilson and Pakamila will have something to say about the environmental impact of that, but it's definitely an option. Zuki, we'll come to you after the break. To you at home, don't go away. We'll be back after these messages. Welcome back. If you just joined us, we're talking transport and COVID-19, and we're joined by a national panel, an international panel of guests from South Korea all the way to Cape Town. So thank you so much to everyone that's joined us. Zuki, let's bring you into this now. The framing and the illustration of the centrality of the taxi industry in particular in providing a service to working class communities has been illustrated by both Pakamile, by Tabiso, and even in the way that Wilson has described services for particularly vulnerable groups of people. However, Zuki, the perception, tell us about how communities regard the perception, especially the negative perceptions that may be out there about the taxi industry. Are there such negative perceptions?
Thank you, Helga. It's so sad, and it is a very sad thing that people, when we speak about the taxi industry, or when we speak about taxi operators and taxi drivers, we speak about them and the perception that they have. It is very sad that we speak about them as if they're living in a different space. We're talking about our fathers and mothers. We're talking about family. We're talking about people that are in the community. So I'm saying it's sad because these people, we live with them and in many cases they help us in terms of crime-related issues, and the fact that when you are in a taxi rank, it is very safe than you being out in the street. So I just want to say that it shouldn't be that we talk about them as a different species. So there's as you mentioned, that there's a perception that they are thugs, which is essentially it's not true. It's not true, but it's what we get, and it's the conversations that are happening between our commuters and communities. But at the same time, we have those people that are operating in taxis as our fathers and as our siblings and people that are part of the family. So it's really bad. The second thing is when we talk about commuters, because the commuters are shared between these different transport modes, and you were mentioning that if we're saying that the percentage needs to be, the capacity would then be it is 70% or even more, will then now need to increase the taxes. I think there's and you're also asking about the gap in the transport system. It is high time we look at trains, fixing the trains and making sure that PRASA is working. The trains are running so that the load is not entirely on the taxis and the taxi drivers or the taxi industry itself.
Camila, I want to bring you in here now because Zuki raises the issue of taking pressure off the road, and we know that working class communities, in times of funerals, weddings, any big major community event, particularly interprovincial travel, require that they need to be on the road. The taxi, that is one of the most important services that the taxi industry provides, is to get people to connect with each other across provinces. Yet, is this not an opportunity to rethink even the aviation industry? Because our country is so vast, it's an opportunity to harness working class travel, working class recreation in the transport and the tourism industry. So when we talk about not a reformist agenda, but a complete reimagining agenda of the way that we think about transport and the value that transport can have in somebody's life, Pakamile?
Well, absolutely, indeed. If you look at the objective reality, which is that in South Africa, the average worker spends on about 50% of his or her income just on transportation alone. That already tells you that this is an area which demands immediate intervention and focus. Our position as NUMSA has always been that public transportation in South Africa needs heavy investment. Secondly, that it should be, if not free, very, very, very cheap, particularly for workers and their families, because of the amount of money that currently is spent on public transport. When you look at South Africa and the way as a society that we've been structured, the South African, the way the industrial setup is, it's still based on apartheid lines, where you have a situation where the majority of people who are black and working class and poor are living on the outskirts of the urban area and need to travel for an hour or more in order to get to work or to opportunities where work is. So you are correct when you talk about a complete reimagining of the structure of our society. I think the thing about COVID-19, what it's done is it's forced governments everywhere and societies in general to have this conversation where we have to accept that, is it profits first or is it human lives and the quality of human lives first? And until we start to change our way of thinking and prioritize and make decisions and formulate policies in terms of what is really important, and in our view what is important is quality of human life first, then unfortunately the situation that we're busy discussing won't change. We do need a radical shift in the mentality, starting at the highest level, going all the way down, so that we can reprioritize and restructure South African society in a more meaningful way that results in genuine transformation in the lives of the working poor in this country.
Thank you for that, Pakamile. I want to bring Wilson in here because what you did, the essence, I think, if I can, the takeaway that I'm getting from what you've said is that an unjust world is not inevitable. Wilson, the International Transport Workers Federation, is proposing a social model of public transport. That there are principles upon which trade unions can campaign on. Talk to us about the social model of public transport.
Yeah, I think that I was, this is a really learning experience for me because I was not aware that the average worker in South Africa pays 50% of their income on transport. And so clearly there is a need for huge investment, and it, as you just said, it needs to be in the type of transport that services working people and helps them get to access other public services and get to access work and school, right? And so, and I'm sure the taxi industry has an important role to play there, but it sounds like you also need development in rail and buses and mass forms of transit that's hopefully integrated with the taxi industry, and so that, you know, that they're working together as opposed to in competition with each other. I really don't know very much about the South African system, but if you're working on a profit model, then conceivably you would have taxis competing with buses for the same customers, right? Or ridership, which is what you don't want. And so the social model, when we talk about a social model of public transport, we are trying to talk about forms of public ownership, if possible. And so, for example, in Korea, one of the struggles that we're engaged in, we have a lot of public transport, but most of our buses are private. And we've been fighting for a long time to get either more regulation of the buses or municipalization of the buses so that they come under public control. And coming out of COVID, that's starting to happen in a few different regions. We also have some cases where taxi workers will take over a taxi company that's collapsed and do like a taxi cooperative, which ultimately should be supported more as one form of, you know, worker control. And I think that, you know, and if you look at countries like the UK, there's a discussion that's been going on for a long time about nationalization of the railway, which is getting some traction in the COVID era, because anyway, the government is bailing out the rail. So if they're going to bail out the private companies, why not nationalize it, make it an integrated system, and have it serve the interests of working class people and workers and the environment. And so the social model of public transit we're talking about is based on that: public ownership, democratic control with workers unions playing a leading role in the planning and in deciding how planning of transport is done and how operation of transport is done. And again, as I said, the integration of these different modes, and then funding systems that are not based on a profit model, but based on, for example, taxes that go to, like, for example, in places like France, there's a tax on employers who benefit from the public transport that their workers are using, and that tax then goes back into the public transport system to make it better. And so that we see as a more sustainable funding model than either going to private companies that have to take their profits out of the fares, and even depending too much on fares when it's poor people that have to pay them, right? So in Korea, in the metro, our metro affiliates are calling for the government to give more support through tax systems and sometimes through the money that's earmarked to construct roads to go into supporting discounts for elderly workers, or the lines of the metro that are not making a profit but are important because they're servicing outlying areas. That's what we're driving for. But what's really important there, the thing that is important that's difficult, is that in order to make this possible, we as unions have to have clear policies about what we think public transport should look like. And we also have to break out of companies and break out of individual modes and talk to each other and come up with those integrated plans. And when we have them, then we have more of a basis for calling for more decision-making power for unions and for renationalization or remunicipalization. So there's some opportunities, but we also have to really up our game, I think, in this moment.
I have to break you there. We have to go to a break, but when we come back, I'm going to bring Tabiso into this part of the conversation around the social model. I saw him nodding and looking intently. And I'd be interested to know what the taxi operators in South Africa think about a social model of public transport. Don't go away, we'll be back after these messages. Thanks. Welcome back. We're going into our final segment of this Labour show, coming to you from our virtual studios in Khayelitsha, Cape Town. We're talking transport. Tabiso, before the break, Wilson was describing to us what the International Transport Workers Federation is proposing in terms of a social model of transport, in which the state and communities, as part of the citizenry, have ownership. Do you think you could possibly go to your taxi operators with such a proposal, in which the community has an ownership stake in the taxi operator's business?
Look, when you look at when you listen to what Hulsan said, and you listen to what Pagamile said earlier, you would realize that there are fundamental similarities in their view. And this has been actually at the heart of our discussion with government for a very long time, because for as long as you see one mode of transport as a competition to the other, obviously the commuter is bound to bear the consequences thereof. I mean, at the moment, the State South Africa says during their survey, says 68% of South Africans still prefer taxis as their mode of transport. But when you look at what government priorities are in terms of public transport, the opposite is true. I mean, how do you take billions and billions of rents and share them between buses and trains at the exclusion of taxis? It doesn't make sense. Now you're sitting with taxis which are costly. You are sitting with taxis whose operators are reluctant to renew their fleet because really literally people are living from hand to mouth. And obviously this impacts on the social aspect of it, because now you are talking about the service that when it was discovered 50 years ago, it was meant to be a service where people help each other, and has translated and transformed into something else as a result of the realities that are faced. So what Ulsan is saying is partially what could be considered practical, but unfortunately the reality in South Africa is that investment into public transport is still looked at from the very small players who happen to continue to enjoy the benefits, much to the disadvantage of the larger community.
Zuki, the social model of public transport. I know that Unite Behind have really taken the campaign to make sure that PRASA, and for Woolson's benefit, PRASA is the rail agency in South Africa, to really make rail travel more accessible, make it safer. Just give us a sense of what that campaign entails, and if there's opportunity perhaps to bring some of the taxi operators to think through a less competitive relationship between the transport services.
Okay, so the campaign is called #FixOurTrains. So what we've been calling for now is firstly, as everyone knows that PRASA as it stands, they don't have, they're under administration. Everything that's happening there is being led, or decisions are being taken by one person, which is Administrator Bongi Season Bondo. So what we've been calling for as Unite Behind is a safety plan that is commuter-centered. As we've seen in the past, PRASA does not have that. PRASA only has a safety plan that speaks to infrastructure, but really they speak less about passengers and the safety of commuters. So that's one of the things that we've been calling for, on top of like calling for PRASA to have a board. Right? So that's one part. So in the question of a model, or whether or not we can bring the taxi drivers on board, I think honestly that's doable. You know, there's nothing that's stopping us from making sure that there's some integration between the taxi drivers, taxi owners, as well as the trains. Sorry. So, but then now again, you looking at the political landscape of this country, and how this country is as it stands in the Western Cape, particularly when we speak about integration, you now have to speak to the DA, you know, because the province is led by a different political party, which is different to what is happening like nationally. So I think it's a continuous discussion, and maybe in future we might be able to say this is what a social model of public transport look like. But in closing, I think the one thing that the commuters need is a safe, reliable, and efficient transport system. Who brings that on board? It's really beyond us. But we just need safe, reliable, and affordable public transport system.
Wilson, thank you, Zuki. Wilson, the issue of safe and reliable, these are some of the principles which the international trade union community is wanting to campaign on in the social model of transport. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that in this moment, clearly, safety is, you can't stress it enough. And it's safety for workers, and then safe workers deliver safe services, right? And so a lot of people we've also had a huge drop in taxi ridership. I think taxis play a slightly different role in the whole public transport system in Korea, but we also organize some taxi drivers as well as Boston Metro and Rail. So I think that when I was in the paper that you mentioned, I was thinking more about mass transit, where people are coming into contact with each other where it's difficult to social distance, and needing to rebuild confidence in mass transit in order to make those systems sustainable and viable. And so some of that has to do with, again, providing PPE, making sure workers have PPE, making sure workers can take paid time off if they've come into contact with a COVID patient, or they've become ill themselves, or they have other care duties at home. And that it also means adding more more trains or more buses on the same routes, so that you don't have to fill up all the seats, which costs money. And so then we get back to this conversation about sustainable funding models. So, I mean, those things work together. But we've had in Korea I believe in Seoul, we've had one case of a COVID case in the bus, and we've had one case in the metro. And it's, as far as I know, it's actually like New York and London have had huge outbreaks of COVID cases in their public transport worker population, but that isn't true around the world. So it is possible. I just want to, and if we're getting towards the end, I just want to say that in talking about a social model, of public transit, I don't want to talk about, for example, addressing climate change. I don't want to talk about that in a way that is about robbing workers of their livelihoods, or calling for remunicipalization or nationalization, if that means that lots of taxi drivers are going to lose their jobs. That's definitely not what this is about. We have to talk about a way in which all of those workers are involved in the process of changing our public transport systems. And so, I think and I don't know enough about South Africa to make a prescription there, but except to say that everybody, all of the stakeholders have to be part of it, and it has to be led by workers.
Before we close, I have, and maybe I want to bring Tapiso and Pakamila into this very quick question, and Andrew saying to me, we've got less than 2 minutes, but I would be remiss in not noting the issue of climate change and the environment in regards to transport services. Pakamila, the aviation sector, and Tapiso, the road sector. And I realize that it's a bit unfair of me to spring this question on you now, but the position of NUMSA in relation to climate change, and how do we mitigate saving jobs in this?
Well, I think our position as NUMSA has always been that the people who are most affected by the impact of climate change is the working class and the poor. And the reason we have a crisis right now is because capitalists have literally been allowed to run rampant and destroy the environment in the name of profiteering. The social model, which Wilson breaks down as a model for re-engineering transportation, is precisely the kind of model that we would support. We know that whatever kind of changes that take place, we've spoken at length about this in relation to renewable energy, for example. NUMSA is a proponent and a supporter of renewable energy, but we will not support renewable energy if it displaces hundreds of thousands of workers and does not create jobs, because you can't replace one crisis with another crisis.
Sure.
So for us, at any time when radical transformation has to take place, just transition principles must apply. Those were espoused by the International Labour Organization, for example, in relation to renewable energy. Those basic principles would have to apply in the same way in terms of transportation. If we know that we have to make certain changes in order to ensure that our environment is healthier and cleaner and safer, then those decisions have to be taken with the view of protecting workers and their families first. And the process must be driven by communities and working class communities for their benefit. And ultimately, if we can do it that way, then we can ensure that we offset any kind of negative imbalances or consequences that might occur in the process.
Tapiso, I see you shaking your head and nodding in agreement. A just transition for the taxi industry?
We are more than ready for that. In fact, for the past 2 years, we've been looking at the various models, including vehicles that are energy efficient, that are able to deal with the question of climate change. Unfortunately, this year, part of what the COVID did was to disrupt our intended plan to travel to some country abroad to look at how this can be achieved. But yes, what Pakamile is saying is one of the things that we are dealing with one engineering company in the country to look into the whole question of renewable energy and how it can best fit into the taxi industry, because our primary interest as the industry, contrary to popular belief, is the fact that these 600,000 employees who work for us, 95% of them are not employable anywhere because they do not have the necessary papers to be able to find jobs anywhere. So if we do not fight, if we do not save their jobs, they will not be able to put food on the table in the future. And this is why at the heart of the whatever transformation is put on the table, it should be able to either save jobs or transfer or develop those currently in our system into the newer jobs.
Tabiso, Woolsang, Zuki, Pakamile, I want to say thank you to all of you. Indeed, a robust conversation. And I get the sense that this conversation is going to continue even after we stop recording. So it was great to have you on our panel, Woolsang. Tabiso, indeed a different view of the taxi industry for me anyway. And I'm hoping it's going to spark even bigger conversations with Unite Behind. Zuki, thank you very much for representing the voice of the community. Pakamelo, I'm sure that you will not be a stranger to the Labour Show in the future, and we look forward to having you back. To you at home, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Keep safe. Woolsang, to you as well, keep safe in South Korea. From me, Helgi Jansen Daubio, and our virtual crew, good night.